Hey, everybody, and welcome to Key Conversations for Leaders. I'm your host, John Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Paul White. Dr. Paul is a psychologist, author, speaker, and consultant who makes work relationships work. He has written articles for and been interviewed by Bloomberg's Business Week, CNN, Fortune.com, Entrepreneur.com, Fast Company, and many, many more. He is the co-author of 3 books, including The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, written with Dr. Carrie Chapman, author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The 5 Love Languages, and we are certainly happy to have him here today. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Paul.
You bet. I'm glad to be with you, John.
I wanted to ask you, you named your company Appreciation at Work. Clearly, this is a passion for you. What was it that drew you to this topic?
Well, I'm a psychologist by training, and I grew up in the context of a family-owned business outside of Kansas City. And so sort of have a unique perspective that way, and wound up going into consulting with family-owned businesses and dealing with the family issues that are intertwined and largely around business succession kinds of things. And it was in that work that I saw that often at that point, dad and CEO and son or daughter and next gen were not connecting. And in fact, I had a situation where I asked the dad, I said, how's the plan going? He says, it's going well. I think my son's stepping up. It's going to be fine. I walk across the hall, ask the son, and he says, this is a disaster. It's never going to work. It can't ever please my dad. And so did some investigation. And at that point, this was about 10 years ago or more. And found out, there's a lot of emphasis on employee recognition, but it clearly wasn't working. And so wanted to find out why and what we could do about it. And so my wife and I had been impacted by the 5 love languages. So I pursued Dr. Chapman for a year and finally got to meet with him and pitched the idea. And then we worked together on applying the concepts to work-based relationships.
That's very, very exciting. And I come from a family business background as well. And is that different? And I want to come back and talk about the 5 love languages of appreciation at work as well. Is it different when it's a family business and having that recognition because of the history, or can we assume it's the same?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, it sort of depends what hat you're wearing, right, when you communicate, because if it's, father or mother and son or daughter, and it's that relationship, the 5 love languages, which are developed for personal relationships, would seem to fit. And whereas if it's, in a business kind of setting and interaction, the 5 language of appreciation would fit more. And what's interesting is, they're the same in name, but they look different in how they're applied. And so we've actually done a little research and found out that, a person's love language is not necessarily their primary appreciation language in the workplace. So it makes a difference.
So maybe and in the personal relationship, it could be the physical touch, but not so much necessarily. Well, you can have a pat on the shoulder as well,
Right.
but maybe words of appreciation might be a better way to go
Exactly.
in the workplace. That
Yep.
makes sense. What do you find is the link between, appreciation, recognition, and employee performance and engagement?
Well, clearly, the Gallup organization that interviewed and surveyed over 1 million people worldwide found that appreciation, as opposed to recognition, we can differentiate those in a minute, but appreciation is one of the top 4 factors of employee engagement. And it's actually often the one that's most difficult for organizations and leaders to change, because you can, involve people in decisions and improve your communication style. But until recently, they've had a hard time figuring out how to make people feel valued and appreciated, because it was more focused on performance, which is okay. But so appreciation is a key factor, and it can make a big difference in all those things that we know employee engagement changes, as far as staff turnover and improving customer service ratings and job satisfaction, all that kind of thing.
Would you mind sharing with us the difference? Because I imagine a lot of managers think, well, I recognize my employees all the time. Isn't
Sure.
that appreciation?
Yeah, well, it could be. They overlap for sure, but recognition largely is about performance, right? And that's what it was designed to be, and it works well when it's designed and implemented consistently. to reward and call attention to, somebody that's done a good job and maybe above and beyond even, or that they've reached goals. And so recognition is about getting the job done. Appreciation, we believe, and we really talk about authentic appreciation, is about the person. It's that because we're people, right? We're not just employees, we're not just work units. And yet a lot of employees feel like the sole focus is just on production and they only hear something positive if they've met or exceeded their goals. And yet, life intertwines with work, as we know now more than ever. And so if we ignore the life aspect and the person aspect, we're really missing a lot of who that person is. And one of the nice things, appreciation and recognition dovetail together well. That if you have a good, performance-based recognition program, but you need to fill in the gaps because recognition does not make people feel individually valued, and it wasn't designed to. But sometimes there are periods in our life where we're not at the top of our game. I had twins early in my career, sleep deprivation of the max. I was not the best, counselor at that point in time. And so did I need to be recognized for performance? No, I just needed support as a person, and a little bit of encouragement. And the same thing, we have people, in fact, we know that recognition only touches about the top 10 to 15% of our work group. And usually it's the same people, right? There's sort of the stars. And so that leaves a big 50 to 60% of solid people. They're good people. They're working hard. They're just not, your stars, and they don't hear anything. And so one important statistic is we know that 79% of the people who leave work voluntarily, they quit their job, cite a lack of appreciation as one of the key factors for them leaving. And so you put this big group at risk for checking out because they don't ever hear anything, but we can show appreciation for them, sometimes about performance, but it can be about something else. Appreciation can be about a characteristic that we value. Personally, I like to work with cheerful people more than grumbly people, and so I can show appreciation to somebody for say, Susie, you just got the coolest smile and laugh. I love to hear you light up the room. Is it about performance? No, but does it mean something? Yes. And it helps them feel valued and that they're noted as a person.
I want to see, is there a correlation between like the recognition and like performance, like doing behavior,
Yes.
versus appreciation and like a beingness or the qualities of that person, like you said, like lighting up the room?
Right. And even, we've done this with, at least hundreds, if not thousands of organizations where, common issue is, well, should you show appreciation to somebody who's not really performing well? Well, if you want to keep them, you might want to, and that there's sometimes, we see the ability and future in a person. They're not there now. And so you can appreciate somebody for something outside of work as well. You might have a colleague, who's training for a 10K and say, man, that's cool that you do that. You got the self-discipline to do that. I don't have that. Or a single mother and you say, man, Josephine or whatever her name might be, and say, you're so committed to your kids and you just love your kids. It's just, it's inspiration to me. And so is that about work? Is it about them? Yes. Is it going to, create some loyalty and some connectedness? For sure. So it's more about the person than just getting things done.
It's a really good point about, so am I supposed to appreciate someone if they're not performing? But I suspect if you really step back, well, you can appreciate their effort. You can appreciate their tenacity, and they're still showing up and they're doing their best, even though they don't necessarily have those skills yet.
Right.
And I think there's the other side of I imagine people have expressed to you, but I don't want, if I appreciate everyone, then it feels like I'm being unauthentic. If I just say good job to everyone, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
How do you find that balance?
Well, actually, I've got, I don't know what, 100,000 people on my newsletter list, and we do polls occasionally. And one of the polls we asked is, what don't you like to hear, as far as words? And one of the top responses was, good job. People don't want to hear it because it's too vague, it's too general. Anybody can say it about anybody else. It doesn't mean anything. And so we really teach, we teach a model of how to be specific with people. Use a person's name, You say specifically what they've done that you value and how and why it's important to you or the organization. And the more specific you are, the more likely it's going to be viewed as authentic or genuine. The more vague you are, you're more likely to get into sort of being condemned as just being, going through the motions.
I think that's a really good point. It goes back to having the technique, the skills, the template, if you will, and then showing up and being authentic. It also sounds like it takes time. Like you can't just do the boilerplate good job. That doesn't add to the relationship. That you have to really pay attention to your employees, and that makes the difference, I imagine.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, so people often ask, well, how do you know what a person's language of appreciation is? And we've worked at it over time. And in the 5 love languages, Dr. Chapman talks about, sort of you watch what they do to others and, try to do that. That's fine in personal relationships. You don't have that many data points in the workplace of observing somebody showing appreciation, right? So that doesn't work. Obviously, remotely, it's tougher. And also, we've found that only about 75% of the time, which is decent, but do people use the language that they actually want, okay? But more important to that is in the workplace, we found that it's not only the language, but the specific action that's important, because a person may value quality time, which is, spending time with somebody that's important to them. But for some people, it is getting together or having some personal time one-on-one with their supervisor or manager. That's less so. That used to be more the case, but now it's more about getting together with peers and hanging out with their colleagues. And so you could get the language right and assume, and I tell managers, just because your team member has quality time as their language doesn't mean they want time with you, okay? So, we can't make that, you may be great and all that, but I've had people say, my manager is intense and I'm sort of shy. I don't want to, I don't want time with them, but I want to go to lunch or go out afterwards. And so we developed an online assessment that comes with the book. We've had 250,000 plus people take it. That identifies your primary language, your secondary, your least valued, which is sort of your blind spot. It's the one you don't think about that you're going to have team members about, and then be able to identify not only the language, but the actions that are specific to each person on your team.
So, and I know you do keynotes and a lot of leadership training. Walk us through a little bit, if you don't mind. So it sounds like the assessment is part of that discussion with an organization. What would you mind sharing with our audience? Like, what are the 5 basic, appreciation languages that exist in the business context?
Sure.
And do they vary? Is there one that's more common than others, or is it pretty equal across the board?
Yeah, no, I'll tell you about that. So words of affirmation is actually the most common. It's identified by 46% of the workforce as their primary language. Part of that, I think, is enculturation. Part of it's sort of easy to do, but nonetheless, words. And words can be, just a personal compliment or a thanks. You got to be specific about it. But also it can be written, right? Through a text or an email or a Post-it note, and you leave it on somebody's desk. But the issue is that you need to be specific about what they did and how it impacted you, the organization, your customer. You say, Brian, thanks for getting your report done in and on time to me. That made it easy for me to turn my report around to my supervisor. And so thanks for doing that. And if you get the action and the language right, it doesn't take a lot. It's not like you have to be doing this all the time. It's really sort of hitting the target versus sort of a shotgun approach. So one of the things we do know is that going up in front of a large group to be recognized is not often the way people want. I mean, we have 40% at least of the general workforce don't want to go up in front of a large group to be recognized. And so that's actually a negative. Quality time is, like I said, either individual time with your supervisor or hanging out with your friends. Key part is that it's with people that you want to hang out with versus they want to hang out with you and you're not necessarily that interested. But and it's 26% of the workforce. So it's second, but clearly less, so about 1 out of every 4. And like I said, in the past, it was more related to who you report to, your supervisor and manager, but now it's more about colleagues and people you like to hang out with that way. And then acts of service is 22%, so about one out of every 5 employees. Acts of service isn't rescuing a low performing colleague. It's more, probably the best context is when you're on a time oriented project that you're having to push to get it done, and you're just really hammering it. What's something that somebody could do to help make that go better? And that could be, bringing in, dinner for you so you can keep on it. It could be sort of taking care of your daily tasks so you can focus on the project that you're working on, or it could be, that you delegate part of it. Acts of service, a key part is that you need to do it in the way that they want and at the quality level that they want. One of the reasons that people don't like to hand that off is they're afraid it won't get done, in the right way. So, but I had one CEO tell me, he said, my language is get her done. He said, don't give me stuff, don't tell me stuff, just help me get things done. I know you're on my team. And these people, a lot of times words don't mean much, and that you can actually sort of waste, sort of like words are cheap, that kind of attitude. And so you can waste your time doing stuff that doesn't matter to them. Fourth language is tangible gifts. And tangible gifts is an interesting one because that's where employee recognition programs focus a lot, on giving things and rewards and all that. It's not, in our model, it's not compensation, it's not bonuses or whatever, but it's really small things that are showing you getting to know the other person and what they like. So it could be, their favorite kind of coffee, whether that's a pumpkin spice or whatever, or a favorite snack. Could be maybe something about their sports team, and remotely, we're able to do this as well, but, or you send them an article about, maybe a player, that they like, and it's a kind of gift, that it's information. And so, but it's only 6% of the population. And it's interesting because, one, I think a lot of companies waste a lot of money on gifts and rewards that don't impact. But the way that you can make them more impactful is that you combine it with one of the other languages. So if their language is words, you make sure and you say something about them or quality time. And so it makes those impactful. Because people said, if I never hear anything, if you never stop by to check in and see how I'm doing, if I never get any help when I need it, and yet I get a gift, feels pretty superficial. And so that's where that's at. And then physical touch, which is obviously the interesting one in the workplace and it's largely spontaneous celebration, right? I mean, it's a high five, and we're talking pre-COVID days. I'll give an example here in the past, but or a fist bump, a pat on the back, maybe a congratulatory handshake. It seems like the fist bump is the one that's going to stay for right now. I've tried out a backhanded five. Doesn't really work. Doesn't feel the same, So, but the fist bump seems to be out there, and for some people, it's less than 1% of the population, but it differs regionally and culturally, right? So we have our materials in Spanish and Portuguese and other languages, and for our Latin American friends, physical touch is more important. Also in the South, they're more likely to give side hugs. I mean, you're in Charlotte, I worked with an organization that they merged New York and Charlotte, and they did not know how to greet one another. It's just culturally really different, because in New York, this is what a physical touch is like in New York. Hey, right? I mean, that's it, right? So sort of from a distance. So that's what's up with those.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that comprehensive overview and giving us the relative percentages. And in the end, the percentages help, but knowing the individual employees, what their preferred language of appreciation really is what matters. You also mentioned remote work. And I know you just finished or are finishing touches right now on a big research project you were doing on remote work. What are some of the concerns that managers need to really be thinking about in relation to showing appreciation in the context of remote work?
Yeah, actually, we did research a few years ago before the COVID and big working from home movement to look at how people who work remotely, if they differed in how they wanted to be shown appreciation. And it ties into what we've done since about what's going on with working from home employees and what they're concerned about. I think that the biggest practical issue for managers and leaders is that the default kind of communication when you're working remotely goes primarily to tasks and work. I mean, you're getting together, you're having a conference call, and you're working on a project, or a budget or whatever, and it's pretty work oriented. And you don't have those sort of informal interactions where you walk by somebody's office and you stick your head in and say, hey, how's it going? Or you don't run into them in the break room or coming in from, the parking lot or whatever. And so all those sort of informal conversations about personal stuff, about sports, about how their kids are doing, what they do over the weekend, there's no sort of automatic space for that. And so it's really important. And I mean, this is what they say, I'm not just a performer. I've got a life, and especially working from home. And if, finding out how that's going with the kids, at school and so forth, is really important. And so making space, and it can be as simple as maybe texting or emailing somebody and say, hey, I'd like to check in for 5 or 10 minutes. When would be a good time? Because one of the things we found is people are reluctant to just do it because they don't know what the other person's doing, right? And so they don't want to interrupt them. But if you sort of find out, set up a time and just chat. And a part about that is that it's important, I think, for leaders to share some about themselves. Otherwise, it feels like interrogation. It's like, oh, what'd you do this weekend? How are your kids? How's your wife? Whatever. Versus saying, hey, I got to go sailing this weekend. It was fun. Or how about this Chiefs? I'm from the Midwest, and so, so you offer some of yourself as well, and people are more willing to share versus if you're just sort of bombarding them with questions.
That's a really important thing because I can see how it can be very transactional, task oriented, project oriented, but you're taking that time that sounds like it goes into quality of time and just really spending time with that person, which you don't get if you don't really make the time. So that's a really important point. Thank you for
Yeah, and
sharing
we,
that.
another way to deal with that is to sort of open up a conference call or a Zoom call or whatever ahead of time and let people get on and chat, because that's what happens in real life. People show up a little bit early, some of them, and they'll chat for a few minutes or hang on afterwards and catch up as well. So it doesn't have to be boom, 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 moving on.
We had a gentleman on the podcast named Fahim. He said, really, like conferences, the power of the conference is not just the meetings, it's not the breakouts, it's
Right.
the water cooler. It's
Right.
all the conversations that are happening. So having that meeting ahead of time and opening it up, it sounds like a really great idea to kind of accomplish that task without being in person, which you can't always do. Is there a disconnect? Is there any mismatching that you see between, like right now, what employers are doing, managers, leaders are doing, and what employees need, especially in this remote work environment that we live in?
Yes and no. It depends on the employer and maybe on the industry, but I find, generally speaking, that some more production oriented industries and companies are focusing on that and talking about efficiencies and the financial saving of not having to have an actual office. And man, if they do not pay attention to the relationship side of it, they're going to have a rude awakening, because within 3 to 6 months, people are going to be leaving and very dissatisfied. And we're already seeing that. And those that are a little bit more relational oriented and sensitive to the needs of that, and are setting up some, just team meetings just to get together and chat. I mean, sometimes you set up and or like for us, most of our team is in one place. And so we will actually get together physically once every couple of weeks, just to have that interaction. And I think there's a real risk for the companies that are focused on the efficiencies and the productivity and miss the personal side of things, that things are going to fall apart for them.
So this is, I mean, a key ingredient. It's not just about having the people and having the assets. It's really about the relationships. And if you don't build appreciation, recognition, acknowledgement of the people that are involved, it sounds like, I mean, the company is potentially going to fall apart to some degree.
Well, think about how difficult communication is when we meet with one another, and I mean, there's miscommunication that happens all the time. If you take out a key aspect of either availability or being able to see and sort of read people's nonverbals, miscommunication is going to increase, which leads to poor decisions or bad implementation or misunderstandings, which relates to conflict and tension, which then decreases communication, I mean, it just becomes a negative snowball that we're going to have to sort of watch out for.
When you think about the frequency that managers are meeting with employees and having these conversations, is there ever a point where it's too much, or is there an ideal frequency of that?
Well, yeah, is there too much? Yeah, I mean, if you're interfering with their ability to get their work done, right? But I've never heard anybody complain about feeling appreciated too much, right? I mean, so that I don't think that's a worry. I have people say, well, they're going to become satiated and all that. It's like that can be true for rewards because the reward loses its impact and meaning. But I think when you have a personal relationship, I think it's pretty rare, if ever, that happens. It's really largely a factor of your relationship, who they are. Some people need more encouragement than others, but I think if you are focusing on communicating it in the way that's meaningful to them, you're going to hit the target. You're going to know you're good to go. The problem is when people just do the shotgun approach. We're going to send emails and thank you cards to everybody, and we're going to stop by and see everybody. There are a lot of people who say, I do not want you to stop by and see me. I mean, so we got to do what's important for each person.
It sounds to me like rewards that might have diminishing returns. When you do that blanket good job,
Yeah.
that's where you're going to have diminishing return as well. But I think you're saying if you really spend the time and deliver it in the way, for example, that you teach, with specificity, with context and impact, using their name and having that heart to heart, that's going to be welcome. Because I agree, the research shows that people are not connecting with their bosses. They're afraid to talk, and there's a relationship breakdown that's there. What would you say to a manager that is out of practice and maybe has some anxiety or apprehension about instituting this if for fear of being inauthentic?
Yeah. Well, it's a reasonable fear. I mean, I've had some people say, well, that's the first positive thing I've heard out of that guy's mouth in 5 years, and am I supposed to believe it? And so I think the trick is this, or, the step is to start somewhere with somebody. A lot of, I work with computer scientists and engineers and regular engineers, and they want to do a spreadsheet and get it all planned out. And then they never actually gets implemented. So it's usually start somewhere with somebody, start with words, because that's the easiest. If you're a little bit shy or, uncomfortable personally, write it. I mean, email or text. That way you can sort of, word it correctly and send it when you want. And sometimes, I've talked to people about sort of 3 groups to look for, either to start with, as far as one is just your right-hand person that, it's just pretty easy. What you value about them, it'd be pretty easy just to do it, and it's an easy win for you. Secondly, if you got a really key team member you don't want to lose, you better make sure you're doing something pretty soon because they're on the trading block. And then third, just somebody that's discouraged, right? That they need some encouragement. And encouragement and appreciation are largely the same action, but their focus of time is different. Appreciation is about the past, about what we appreciate and value that they've done. Encouragement is the present and the future, that we're coming alongside while they're working on a challenging project, and keep hitting obstacles and say, man, hang in there. You're doing a good job. And I really saw how you asked for help and got help, and so start there, and you'll see that you get some pretty positive feedback fairly quickly, and it's rewarding and encouraging to continue.
What's been the most rewarding thing for you in doing this work?
It's fascinating to me. So, we've sold over 500,000 books, which is significant. 250,000 people take our inventory. We have over 900 certified trainers. We've developed an online train the trainer process that individuals within an organization can take and then take their teams through. And just the fact that it continues to grow and spread word of mouth is really encouraging to me. So it means that there's some value there. And so that's fun. And to be able to hear individual stories that come out. We have a mining group in South Dakota and Wyoming, Colorado that, they're hard hat guys, the cement truckers and the miners. They wanted, we have little icons of each language, and they wanted stickers to put on their helmets, and so just little things like that. That it's like, yeah, they got it and they like it. So that's fun.
I really appreciate that. That's very, very powerful. It seems to me as we're talking here that really some of these are words, right? Some of these are written, some of these are acts of service and other things to get that appreciation across. It's really about a conversation, and this podcast is about conversations. Just kind of wondering, when you think back in your life, what was one of the most significant, if you can remember, conversations that you've had where maybe you felt appreciated or inspired that has shaped you and kind of led you to where you are right now?
Yeah, this isn't a singular one, but professionally, one of the things I've done over time is I evaluate students that have learning difficulties, so ADHD and dyslexia and all that. And I've evaluated, I don't know, 4,000 plus students over the years. And to run into somebody at some kind of event, it could be the grocery store or a soccer game or something, and they'll introduce themselves because I might remember their face, but I'm not going to remember the name. And they'll say, I just want to let you know how much that when you did the evaluation and helped us figure out our student and gave us a pathway to go, that changed the course of their life and how we understood them. And so, that keeps me going on that. And the same thing when dealing with families and businesses. I mean, I had one organization that said, "Man, you've changed our culture, and we are functioning so much better." And I think that's an important message to managers, is that this is not just about making people feel good. I mean, that's nice, but the goal is to help the organization function better, where you have less turnover, less conflict, better productivity. Um, there's just a positive energy that goes and helps you get things done. Customers sense it and feel it. And so it's don't get hung up on the feeling aspect. It's more about let's help people relate together and work together well so that we get the job done that we want to.
Fantastic. Dr. Paul, what's the best way for people to find out more about your work and to stay connected?
Yeah, so our sort of mothership website is appreciationatwork.com, and it's the word at, so appreciationatwork.com. Or you can just Google me. I'm pretty easy to find, Dr. Paul White, and put appreciation in there. We have a blog that we put out weekly that gives information about all this, and a bunch of free videos and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would encourage them to take a look. And we give a code for taking the inventory with the book. You also can just buy groups of codes for people. Not everybody's going to want to read the book, and so we can do that. We have a remote version that's the actions are specific for long distance kinds of acts and words and so forth. And actually even created a virtual training process that people can do via video conference. So appreciationatwork.com is where it's at.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Again, Dr. Paul White, thank you so much for being here.
You bet, John. Thanks for having me.
And for those of you watching, until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.